Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Beckwith. I'm N50T. Thank you for dropping in on the 85th Worldwide Radio Operator Foundation webinar. Today, we're going to have a CQ Worldwide DX Contest update. And presenting our presentation will be John Doerr, K1AR, the director of the CQ Worldwide Contest. Before we get going, a couple of rules of engagement, and that mostly has to do with the question and answer time at the end. Feel free to ask any question at any time. You can type it in there. Make sure, please, that you include your call sign in your question so that we know who we're talking to and we sound like we know what we're talking about. And then we'll queue up the questions, and when John's presentation is over, we'll start reading the questions to John. John will answer them, and any clarification we need, we can take care of at that time. I'd like to introduce the king of the CQ Worldwide, John Doerr, K1AR. Can you hear me, John?
I can hear you fine.
Then I think they can hear you. Why don't you take it and run? Thanks, John.
All right, very good. All right, good afternoon, evening, morning to everybody, depending on where you happen to be at the moment. And this is actually pretty cool to be able to do this. I have to tell you, sitting in my chair, if you've never done one of these, it's a little bit strange to be talking to a bunch of people you can't see over the internet. But I have no doubt, being contesters, that you will be heard from both during the webinar and elsewhere. So anyway, what I'm really after today, you know, we have, whenever you do these, we're in kind of a one-room schoolhouse, and we have people ranging from newcomers who are still trying to figure this thing out to those of us who are also still trying to figure it out, but have just been doing it longer. You know, I guess what I would say as the relatively new director of the Worldwide, having a whole one contest cycle under my belt, is that I think I share as director what all the directors have always tried to do with this particular contest, and that is, number one, we just really, at the end of the day, want to get the results right, and we want to get people placed in the place that they belong based on the results they achieved. And a not so subtle second point I would make is that we want to find the bad guys and take them out as best as we can, and really just put together an event that people enjoy and want to keep coming back to. And I think as we look at the activity over the years, a lot of that has been achieved by my predecessors. So a lot of big shoes to step into as I enter year 2 of this, but I'm really excited about what's coming, and I'm not particularly bothered by the fact that we have pretty crummy conditions right now. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in the next few minutes. So let's jump into it. What I'd like to do first is just introduce our committee members, and this is up on the CQWW website. But I just want to say none of this would happen without these guys. I'm just the front guy who takes the questions and does a few other things behind the scenes. But at the end of the day, the heavy lifting is done by all of these folks. And I have to tell you, now having worked with them very closely over the past year, this is without a doubt the hardest working group of people in ham radio. These guys are just amazing. And some of them in particular just put in literally hundreds of hours of work cumulatively to produce the CQ Worldwide and get it from the start of the contest to the results you see in the magazine and elsewhere. So very, very proud of these guys, and I just publicly want to thank them all. If you want to just get a little bit of a peek, and I really want to try to be, I know this is one of these overused political words, but I really do mean it. I really want to be transparent through this and try to give all of you just a good insight into how this whole thing works and what we do, how we operate as a committee, and how we work on the logs and get the results done. But you know, it really begins with at the end of the contest with people mailing your logs in, and for some that's a pretty easy process. For others who are newer at it, it's a challenge. We have a team of people that really do nothing more than simply get the logs in a usable state for us to be able to process them and get them into the results. And I could tell you lots of stories about the kinds of logs we received. I think most of you know that, and we'll talk about this later, that our preferred method of getting logs is in a Cambrillo file format. But we get everything from Word documents to Excel spreadsheets. We even get people sending in PDF files, which I always thought was kind of a clever way to try to get a electronic log into the database. So we pretty much have seen it all, as you might imagine. But once we get through that process, we then move into really the central part of what we do, which is the actual checking of the logs. And as you might expect, as part of that process, you're going to get a number of logs that get flagged as ones that need further investigation for any number of reasons. And by the way, a log that's being investigated doesn't necessarily mean that somebody cheated. It could be simply a matter of being in the wrong category, or operating assisted, but in reality they didn't check the box when they submitted the log and things like that, and we get that. So there is a period of investigation, and then finally the results. What's really kind of was amazing to me is that within the first week or maybe 10 days of the contest, we pretty much know who won what in the contest. It's you know, with computers you can pretty much do it. The bulk of the time, the weeks that follow, is really the investigation part that goes after situations where it's not black and white and we have to do more work. And that's where the fine tuning happens. And in some cases during that process, the rankings of people do change, including even #1 positions and categories. But for the most part, we have worked very hard, as the other CQ contests have, to get raw scores, if you will, high claims out to people within 10 days or so of the end of the contest. And we're very far along at that point in time in terms of where everything stands and where we're going in the contest. So I thought I'd share. Some of you may have seen some of this stuff before, but I'm a numbers guy, and I kind of like some of this stuff. It's fun to look at it, and it's actually kind of amazing. You know, here we are at the bottom of the cycle in 2018, and on sideband, despite that, we still received 8,500 logs. Those logs reflected 3 million QSOs. I mean, think about that for a minute and wrap your head around the fact that 3 million QSOs were made in the CQ Worldwide of the logs received. And then from that, we're able to check 85, 90% of the QSOs that are made against another log. And that's just simply because of everyone submitting things electronically and all of that. But something, the other numbers I think are really encouraging to me, and hopefully to you as well, is that of all the QSOs that are made, 97% of them are good. So we're getting it right. You know, we're getting the call signs right. And you know, on the worldwide, it's not real tough. You know, copy the call. You know, if you're overseas, of course, you got to get the right zone for a U.S. guy and things like that. For the most part, we all know the CQ Worldwide is a call sign copying contest. So it's not surprising that, you know, the good numbers of QSOs are high. When you look at busted calls and busted exchanges, you know, again, those numbers are very low. And the one that stands out a little bit maybe is that 0.6% of not in log. 26,000 times that's happened out of all these contacts. So it's a low number, I suppose, but it is an indicator that sometimes we get a little carried away when we sign our call and work a guy, or at least we think we did, and hit the dial and move on to the next one. And in reality is we really didn't work them. So that's maybe a red flag. It's something to pay attention to for anybody, to just make sure when you work a guy, you really did. Now we have on CW similar kinds of numbers, and you can see again over 8,000 logs received. So we got 16, 17,000 logs in the worldwide last year, which is pretty remarkable. Excuse me. Of those, quite a few more QSOs were made, 4.5 million, and you can see the numbers on the screen where, again, we had a very high match of good QSOs against all that were made, 97%. We have a very high number of QSOs that we can check against other logs. This is all, the progress that's been made, obviously, with the computerization that we've done over the years. I can claim no victory there for me personally, other than stepping into a position where this is what I inherited, which is a beautiful thing. And again, the busted calls and exchange and so forth is pretty similar. What I found to be a kind of a pretty amazing statistic is that there were 40,000 active call signs per mode in the CQ Worldwide. So that however you want to describe it, there's a reason why people call the CQ Worldwide the premier operating event of the year, because frankly it is. If you measure it by activity and other sort of common sense metrics, if you will. Okay, let's move on here. A few more numbers just to tickle your fancy a little bit. Sometimes people ask me, well, what's the profile of countries that you can work in the CQ Worldwide? And it's no surprise that there's been a decline as the sun has gone to sleep. But that 2011 number in particular is to me a staggering number. I would be mindful of the fact that these are entities, meaning not just DXCC, but also, as you know, we count Worktel Europe countries and things like that. So it's a little bit inflated, but nevertheless, there's even if you're not a contester, you want a reason to operate the worldwide. If you're just into DXing, well, here's a good reason right in front of your eyes to do that. Okay, and now this is one that I found really interesting, and that is how much do you guys operate? And here's a kind of an interesting statistic. Now this is kind of a narrower focus, but I picked a single op category for this analysis simply on the basis of these are the crazy guys, right? And if you look at it, only about 3%, or let's say roughly 150 entries in the CQ Worldwide CW last year operated more than 40 hours. Only 3%. So the vast majority of people operated less than that. There's also there were 20 people who operated basically the whole contest. And I don't know how many of you online right now are in that group, but if you are, trust me, you need help. But anyway, I've done it twice myself, and that train left my station a long time ago. But there still are people, and in this case, 20 of them that do that. But isn't it interesting that the median time that people operate is only about 13 hours? And I think that's really an indicator of the fact that so many of the people that participated in the CQ Worldwide contest are not the hardcore contester types, but they're actually normal people that have normal lives, that have things to do on the weekend besides operate a contest. And they get on for a few hours here, a few hours there, and the average is about 13 of them. And you can see that there's a much stronger predominance of operating time on the low end of this table, down in that 5 to 10 hour range, where 1 out of 5 single ops are in that group. So pretty interesting to see how that all plays out. Okay, a little bit about operating categories. So what category are people entering? So this analysis has netted out the single band guys and some of the other esoteric things, and really kind of focused more on the major categories, if you will, all band and multi-two, multi-multi, and so forth. Interesting, 54 multi-multis. Think about that for a minute. And as you can see in the chart, the number one category is all band, low power, unlimited in Europe with 1,000 entries. So those of you who are on the West Coast wondering why we're having such a different kind of contest on the East Coast, well, that's partially why it is. When you look at all those 1,000 entries, and then of course you can see that even in North America, while it's not quite as skewed towards low power still wins the day even in North America. So this is still, for many people, at least in the single op category, this is a low power contest where you have 3,000 logs out of the 6,000 in this particular chart that are operating in that category. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at it. So let's kind of talk a little bit more about the contest itself. And I don't know about you guys, but this is a question I ask myself probably more than I would care to admit. And it is, why the heck do we do this? And anytime you've tried to explain contesting to anybody who's not a ham, sometimes you get that very strange response where you tell them, well, you see, I get on this airplane and I fly to the Caribbean, and so far the person will be hanging in there with you. It's like, okay, this is a fairly normal person. And then you say, but then I land in this beautiful palm tree laden location with beaches and everything you'd ever want to do on vacation. And I proceed to go into this little house, and I sit in this little room that gets to about 10,000 degrees with all the equipment that's running. And I sit in front of this little radio box for 48 hours and talk to thousands of people, typing their information into a computer. And then I turn the computer off. I pack up my things in my suitcase, take the Uber out to the airport, and go home. So you could argue, maybe all of us probably might need to ask this question. So why do we do this? And of course, the answer is, hopefully for 99% of you, this is all about having fun, right? If you're not having fun, then it's probably not something you should be doing. One of the things I, particularly now in the bottom of the sunspot cycle, I have to keep reminding myself is that, you know what, band conditions are crappy for me, and they're going to be bad for everyone else as well. And sure, there's going to be advantages at bigger stations over smaller stations in this world, but at the end of the day, band conditions are the same for everybody. And if the K index is 5 and the A index is 61, well, those numbers are the same in Australia, and they're the same in Japan, and they're the same in the US. One of the things that I would encourage you to think about is using scoreboards as a way to perhaps motivate you, particularly at slow times, or just using it as a fun way to kind of see what some of your competitors are doing who choose to also play in that game. And more and more people, I think you can almost say in the hundreds now, and growing, are using the scoreboards, either one of the two I've listed there, or there's a consolidation tool that posts you to both of them. At the very least, one of the things that a lot of people like to do is simply use it as a way to chase the guy in front of you. And it's kind of fun to watch you catch up to them. It's less fun when they are pulling away. But either way, at least you have something that could be a motivational tool that gives you a little more fun in the process. And just to be clear, use of a scoreboard by itself doesn't make you assisted. you can still be a single up unassisted entry and use the scoreboard in a traditional way with no issues as far as we're concerned. A couple more things that people think about. Like I said earlier, some people just like to chase DX and get on and work stuff, and there's no better contest to do that in the CQ Worldwide. There's something magical about when the Worldwide comes to life. The bands come to life even when conditions are poor, and some amazing rare stuff comes out of the woodwork simply because of all the activity. It's an activity that breeds on itself. Some people like to just do this to go after awards. We now are offering online certificates that we'll talk a little about later. But online certificates are now available to everybody who submits a log on time. Whether you made 1 QSO or 5,000 QSOs, you're still able to be able to receive that. And for some, it's just a matter of going after personal goals. You know, beating the guy across town from you, or making the most QSOs you've ever made. Maybe saying, I want to make 1,000 QSOs for the first time, or I want to work DXEC on a band, or things like that. And then finally, and we'll get to this in a minute, is there's also the notion of the classic category, or classic overlay, we call it. And this is basically a contest within a contest, where the classic category essentially allows you to operate 24 of the hours out of the 48. And it's kind of a kinder and friendlier way of dealing with the fact that none of us are getting younger. And frankly, at 24 hours, the contest is starting to look a little long with a whole day to go, right? So this has been something that's been growing and very popular, and I'll show you some numbers on that in a minute to kind of make that point. Let's talk about just some housekeeping for this year. So those of you who have booked tickets to the Caribbean on Thanksgiving weekend this year for the CW contest, you better change something, because you got a real problem, because this year the contest is not around Thanksgiving here in the U.S., but rather November 23 and 24, and October 26 and 7 for phone. A little while ago, we moved the deadline back to the log deadline for submitting logs back to 5 days from the end of the contest, 5 calendar days. And I remember when that was first done, there was outcries that people wouldn't be able to do this, and there'd be all these requests for extensions and things like that. Well, the reality is, last year, 93% of the logs we got were received within the 5-day deadline. And maybe more impressive, we got over 1,000 logs in the first 8 hours. There's an adage that, or a comment that somebody made to me not too long ago, that says that when you think about submitting logs for this contest or any contest, it's really asking you to operate the contest for within a 48-hour period in 1 minute. In other words, the process for most people submitting a log takes about a minute, maybe not even that long. So basically, at the end of the contest, you already have the whole weekend committed anyway, if you're serious. And the thought of just simply submitting the log and taking 1 extra minute to do it is not I think for most people, a big burden, understanding internet limitations in some places and things like that. But in a general sense, there's really no reason not to do it. And oh, by the way, even if you do it and something got messed up with your file, or you sent the, whatever it is, you still have 5 days to fix it. So because of that, and because I want our committee to be setting the trend for all of this going forward, for the first time this year, I'm requiring all of the CQ Worldwide committee members to submit their logs within 24 hours. So we're gonna set the pace for this particular point, and anybody who's on the committee is going to be submitting a log within 24 hours, unless they got a really good reason not to. And I expect that that's going to be the case. So so as you can see, the log checking is basically done in full in January for phone and February for CW. we're pretty much tied to the publishing schedule of CQ, which is why the actual published results take a little bit longer. We're currently now putting the logs up on the results up on the web as soon as they're available in the digital edition of CQ magazine, which is a little bit earlier than the printed copy. And we're doing that up on CQ Worldwide, CQWW.com. And I think you saw this year how that process worked. So we've pulled it in substantially from the old days when it was literally, as I recall, phone results were showing up in September and right before the beginning of the next contest. So at least we pulled it in a number of months since those days. Okay, moving on. I talked a little bit about the overlay categories. There's really two of them. I mentioned Classic in particular, but there's also the rookie category, and sometimes people get the rookie category a little confused. Rookie does not equate to young. Rookie equates to how long you've been licensed. So, given the average age of ham operators now is about 108, round numbers. If you got your license when you were 105, then you're eligible to enter the rookie category, which is kind of a ironic twist, if you will, but that's the way we play this one. And we've had year on year an increasingly higher number of people who are entering these categories. And I have to tell you, I get lots of stories from people who get awards and plaques and things in various groups of these categories, who are just thrilled beyond words, particularly the rookie guys who didn't even expect to receive anything in terms of an award, and realize that they were able to get on and achieve something right away. And that's pretty cool to be able to do that. So you can see the popularity. There's nearly 1,000 people now entering the 24-hour classic category. Excuse me, and it's very popular in Europe, with about half of the classic activity happening there. A little bit about it, and this is all explained in quite a bit of detail in the rules, which, by the way, as a side comment, I would really strongly encourage people to read the rules. I have to admit, I'm guilty of that in other contests where I don't necessarily do that. I don't remember the specific contest, but there was one not too long ago, one of these contests that ends at 1200 Zulu, and I didn't read the rules, and I'm still calling CQ at like 12:05, and all these people started yelling at me because the contest was over, and I didn't know it because I didn't read the rules. So, nevertheless, Classic is one operator, one radio, no assistance, and it's 24 hours of operating time. So if you have a period of time that's greater than 60 minutes, that's considered off time and not part of the 24 hours. So it would be a really, really bad idea in this category if you take off time for 59 minutes and then get back on again. Because you lost the opportunity to take an off time, and that's going to be credited against your 24-hour total. The other question we get a lot is, if I enter Classic, can I operate more? And the answer is yes. But to enter the Classic part of that, the first 24 hours of the operating time that you use will be what is counted for the Classic overlay score. Okay. Now you see on the right, and this is the first time this has ever been seen publicly, but I was able to arrange to have somebody get a picture of K5ZD setup, which you can see is rather modest. And despite that picture, with Randy sitting there operating, he managed to amass a final score of over 4 million points in the Classic category, which is pretty amazing at the bottom of the cycle for 24 hours of operating. Nearly 3,000 QSOs, and in fact, it turned out to be the #1 world high score. So not only was it impressive with that setup you can see, but the result was pretty impressive as well. And a shout out to Randy. I guess maybe it might have had something to do that he wasn't the director anymore. Now he could actually operate the contest and not worry about anything. So kudos to him. Okay, club competition. Sometimes we get some questions about this. And it's actually pretty simple. For the U.S., to be eligible to submit a club score, you have to be a resident within a 250-mile circle of the club center. And then in the CQ Worldwide, as we have, I think, always, we allow DXpeditions to be part of a club score. So the key is that the entrants must reside within that circle. So you can't be residing in California and submit a score for YCCC if you don't live there in New England. And the same is true for DX club entrance, 400 kilometers. We make it metric friendly. And the radius again is around the club headquarter location. There's a couple subtleties that are in the rules that I'd encourage you to look at. A lot of people say, why isn't my club listed in the results? And the reason is because you have to have 4 entries from that club represented to have it count as a club score. And I would also add the DXpeditions are allowed for this category as well. Okay, this is a significant point. And years ago, when I was writing contest columns for CQ magazine, I think I wrote one that was titled something along the lines of "When does the contest end?" And you know, the reality is that the contest ends when the contest ends at 0 Zulu. And you know, there's a term that floats around that people use sometimes when they bring the subject up, and that's the notion of log washing, which I always thought was kind of a curious name. But nevertheless, it's the idea of you know, taking a finished log and applying it against databases and quote unquote cleaning it up after the contest. That's expressly not allowed in the rules of the CQ Worldwide, period. There's no negotiation there. And it's a hard thing to prove, obviously. You know, I think that one of the ways that you can help your own reputation, if anyone would ever think that you were doing something like that, you can solve that problem by just submitting your log, like I said, 1 minute after the contest. It'll be a pretty short shower if you're only washing it for a minute, right? So, you know, really take this seriously. We take it seriously. And there are some things that you can see and discover when people, you know, choose to do this kind of thing in the log checking process. So it's not like we have nothing available at our disposal to ferret these guys out, and we will. Now, I will say one thing. I personally don't have a problem with somebody going through a log, and if you see an entry like W33 LPL or you know, K1AR or something like that, you know, those are obvious things. But what this is really meant to address is that you made a recording of the contest, and then you spend the next week going through that recording one QSO at a time and fixing all the bad call signs or bad zones or whatever it may be. That's the kind of thing that we simply don't want to see happen, and it's in the rules to say that. At the end of the day, contests should be logged at the time they're completed, period. A little bit about top competitors. And there's really two things that aren't, in this day of technology, that onerous, and I just want to highlight them in particular. The first one is we want all logs that are top competitors, and by that I mean in the top 3 in a category, to list the actual frequencies for the contacts that they make. Now, there's not a logging program out there that doesn't do this, and provided you have an interface to the radio you're using, and any top competitor is going to have that. This is not what I would consider an onerous responsibility on the part of the competitor to do this. I'm simply highlighting it. The one that is a little harder for maybe some is the idea that we also want people to record both the transmitted and received audio as heard by the operator if you're a top entrant in a category. Now, I can already tell you, again, in the spirit of transparency, this is what happens. I get the answers from people who didn't do it, simply saying, well, I had no idea that I was going to be that good. Or I live in a forest, and in my forest, we don't have any way of recording anything in my forest, only in the city. Because for some reason, when I bring my computer from the city to the forest, my audio recording capability goes away, so I wasn't able to do it in the forest. And all these kinds of funny, hilarious excuses, right? This is not that hard. Many of the common logging programs have a lot of this technology built into it. We're not looking for audiophile quality recordings. And the reality is that even though we're requiring this, there's a very, very small number of people that from whom we actually ask to have their recording sent to us. It's simply something that we want to have available if there's something questionable in the log that we want to validate, that is on top of the other tools that we have at our disposal that I'll be talking about here in just a minute. So those are the two big ones for you top guys. Just please do it and make everyone's life easier. Okay, over the years, recent years, we now have a global network of software-defined radios that are basically wideband recording the contest on all bands. So we can virtually hear and look up, if you will, electronically, almost any QSO that anyone makes. And these sites are spread all around the world. At the end of the day, they are what provides proof if a QSO actually happened or not. Now, you can imagine this is an enormously labor-intensive process to do this. So we're not taking 16,000 logs and listening to all of them one at a time to make sure every QSO is correct. But particularly when you have situations where there's a lot of band change violations, and you're trying to determine, was this just a clock issue in the shack, or was something more egregious going on? Or you want to validate, as we had in the case of 2018, a couple examples of more than one signal on the same band, which is not allowed in the rules. We were able to prove that the stations that were doing this, in fact, did have more than one signal, and here's the proof. And then more and more, and take note of this, we're paying more and more attention to the idea of bad or wide signals. Wide signals, obviously, on phone, and bad signals of any kind on either mode. And it's a lot of this sometimes will get generated simply on the basis of somebody complaining. Now, in the old days, people would complain, and sometimes you could say, well, that's just a competitor, who has sour grapes because they lost to another guy. Well, now we can actually see if there's any merit to the complaint. And it's very easy for us to take a look at the bandwidth, the signals, and things like that. And I can assure you that as we look forward, we're going to be taking this area more seriously, and there's even some possible actions that'll take place with logs if, in fact, there's just very, very bad abuse of this particular point. So the point of all of this, of course, is that we now have our disposal a team of people who put incredible amounts of time into listening and finding and going through the data, all in the spirit of just wanting, as I said right up front, just getting it right and finding out what's really going on in real terms in the contest. So I'm sure many of you, if not most, have taken a peek at CQ Worldwide, CQWW.com, and I'm proud to say, and again, I'm going to do another shout out for Randy. He only gets 2 in this particular webinar, but this is another one that I got to give a lot of the credit to him, and that is to have really freshened up the CQWW.com website over the past years, and the past 2 or 3 years in particular. We now have rules available that are translated into 18 languages. We have a network around the world of people who do that for us. Some are on the committee, some are not. We have an FAQ page to help explain some of the more complicated rules in more detail. I'll show you here in a minute. If you haven't played around with the online score database, this is like the coolest thing since sliced bread. If you want to just see, you know, in a very simple couple keystrokes, the history of your entrance in the CQ Worldwide over the years, you can now do that, and that data is all available. This is also now where we have all the electronic certificates online. We have all the results for every CQ Worldwide back to the very beginning. So if you want to look at the very first CQ Worldwide result, it's on the website. And then we also blog and do other things for announcements to keep people informed. So this is basically just a quick statement about the online database. It is the official record of the CQ Worldwide results. So if you go in there and see a mistake that you know, you're not listed as an operator or some other thing like that, we can fix that. But understand that when we make changes, this is the official record that we use for the CQ Worldwide historically all the way back to the beginning. You know, literally 360,000 entries are made into this thing, going from 48 all the way up to 2018. And a shout out to John N2NC, who was a big part of the driving force for getting all this data in. As you might imagine, this was an incredibly labor intensive process over a couple years to get all this entered. And due to his work and the team that he worked with, we were able to achieve that. So very proud of those guys. Certificates now, as I mentioned, anybody who has an entry from 2011 going forward can print their certificate. If you have a special need or request for one that's older than that, shoot me an email or send me a note via questions@cqww.com, and we can figure out something for you for an older one. And understand that this applies to everybody. If your log is late, you don't get a certificate. If your log is on time, you get an award. So it's really pretty straightforward. You simply click on the certificate button on the screen. It'll tell you what you're going to get, and it prints it, or it gives you a PDF file that you can then print and put it in a frame and hang it on your wall, and off you go. And that's the world of certificates today. And I have to tell you, this is when I think years ago, I was thinking about this before our webinar started. Back in I think about 1995, when I was working at a company, and I was up in New England, and my family had moved up with me yet, so I was doing the Nothing to Do in the Evening program. We were still hand typing with an IBM Selectric certificates, and I'll remember the year to my grave of typing something like 5,000 certificates on an IBM Selectric and putting them in envelopes one by one, and putting stamps on the envelope one by one, and putting address labels on the envelope one by one. So when I look at that world and then fast forward to what we have today, thank God for technology. That's all I can tell you. Big point about log submissions. There's now a wonderful tool on the Worldwide site that basically allows you to web upload your log. It's incredibly easy. There's wonderful diagnostics to help you if you're not fluent in Cabrillo and the Cabrillo standard. And it basically allows you, it gives you some fault checking. So if you were assisted but forgot to say that when you entered the information into your logging program, well, here's where that can get corrected. The log can either be pasted in, or you can grab a file off your computer. You can see why I said a few minutes ago that really there's no reason why we can't get our logs in even sooner than we do. And as impressive as it is to get 1,000 logs in 8 hours, I'd love to see 5,000 logs in 8 hours or even less. But here's an example of the checking, the format checking that this particular application does now for us. and then you enter your email address. This is where the log gets submitted to the robot, and all the magic that happens after that is now our problem once you get a successful submission at this point. And this really is an opportunity to do that. And here's where I'm sure many of you have seen, because you want to see, did they get my log? And even though you got your email confirmation, there's also something reassuring about being able to see it on the screen and say, okay, my log has been received and I'm done. In addition, we're also sending out log checking reports to everybody who submitted a log. We do some preliminary distribution early on to the high scores, and it's mostly a quality assurance, quality check thing. Make sure that we don't have problems in the scoring mechanisms and some of the mechanics behind the scenes before we do a mass distribution or make a huge mistake in the in the results, which has happened because humans are involved. So all entrants will indeed receive a log checking report. If for some reason you have one from previous years that you have not received, send a note into questions at CQWW.com and we'll send it to you, no problem. And basically, this is a pretty standard format. Again, it gives you a perspective on how your log was scored, where the penalties were calculated, where the errors were found. And this is not meant to be something that becomes a negotiating tool with the committee unless there's a clear and obvious mistake, but rather it's really, if anything, meant to be a learning tool for you to say, hey, I got to give this particular aspect of my operating a little more attention for the next one. And it's also not meant to be a punitive tool. It's meant to be information. And all of this is really with the common goal I think we all have, and that is to be better operators and more accurate. Accuracy is good. And finally, I would just highlight that, as I said before, reading the rules. You know, you're not going to have fun in the Worldwide unless you actually get on and operate in it. You're not going to have fun in the Worldwide unless you follow the rules. You are going to have a lot of fun in the Worldwide because you're going to work a lot of stuff that you're not going to work any other way. And submitting your log on time is just your key to getting awards and being part of the game. There's plenty of ways to reach us. Excuse me. Besides the website, the one that you know, sometimes you see these things and you say, well, that's a black hole at questions@CQWW.com. Well, the reality is I get those emails directly, and I view this as one of the jobs of the director. And hopefully, I think most of you saw in the 2018 experience that I try to be very good at getting back to people. And I may not even have the answer for you right away, but you're going to get a response. So don't hesitate to throw questions at me. I think in the 2018 contest, I got something on the order of 200 emails in the first week of the first couple days after the phone contest, and same for CW. So it's it's kind of a big rush, but once we get through it, then it's actually not so bad. So please feel free to use that. We don't do a particularly good job of this, but you know, Facebook, we do have a page on Facebook. And a little bit of tweeting on Twitter when it isn't being used by others, if you know what I mean. And but nevertheless, the modern tools are out there, and we're using the modern tools, and that's a good thing. And with that, that is the end of the slides I have. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mark at this point, and I'm happy to take any questions unless they're hard. And Mark, you got it.
Very good. Well, thank you, John, very much for an informative and comprehensive presentation. You know, every time I hear about this stuff, I can't get enough of it. A reminder to anybody listening, if you have a question, there is a system for asking questions in writing in your control panel. You can pull that down and type in your question. I'll get it here. I'll relay it to John. Got a couple of questions here. A couple of questions came in about logging, additional logging details, and a couple about awards. John, I'll start by saying there's a guy whose call sign is Kilo Golf 5 Radio Oscar Kilo, and he asks, if I don't turn in a log, are other people penalized?
Yeah, we actually get that question fairly often, and the shorter answer is no. If somebody does not submit a log, then we simply have a situation where that QSO is not able to be verified. But the other person who worked you will not lose any points, and so you don't have to have any guilt for not sending a log in. If you choose not to, nobody will lose points as a result.
Roger. Well, I knew the answer to that question already. That people ask when I talk about contests, a lot of times they're under the misconception that if they don't want to get on the air for it because they're afraid if they make a contact but then they don't turn in the log, then they'll mess somebody else up and they'll get a bad reputation. But I always try to explain to them that's not how that works. And that was great at the beginning. You showed that 44,000 stations were on the air and you received 8,000 logs. I guess that kind of tells that story.
That's right.
Another question for you, John. K1AR wants to know, what if I log something wrong during the contest, but I don't realize it? I keep working QSOs, but just before I see the bad contact scroll off the top of the screen, I realize I logged it badly, so I leave myself a note. Given the 1 minute rule at the end of the contest, is it okay to go back and fix that kind of thing afterward?
So you log something like you typed it incorrectly, or whatever the circumstances are. You log something that you know is wrong, but you know what's right about it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and you even, I know I use the note function sometimes in my logging program that just says that guy that says, K88YBZ has too many 8s in it or something, and I leave the note so that at the end of the contest I don't have to go back and look for weird looking call signs. I just go to my notes and I find the things that I told myself I should go fix. Yeah,
okay. Well, again, if you're the type that wants to be part of the cool kids and submit your logs right away after the contest, and you discover the K88 scenario, let's say, or you had a note to that effect that's worthy of a correction, there's nothing that says you can't resubmit your log. So I would probably be inclined to take that route versus worrying about trying to get all your notes for obvious things corrected and administratively applied in the 60-second window after the contest, right? What we're really just trying to, again, the spirit of all of this conversation is not to be hard guys about this, right? The spirit about it is simply to say that we don't want people doing a lot of messing around with their logs against databases and recordings and things like that frankly is completely outside the spirit of what we're trying to do here. So something like as described there, do it when you can do it. If you submit your log early and find a need for whatever reason to resubmit it, you got 5 days to do it, and that's how I would look at it.
QSL. I know I can crank through my notes and have that done in a lot less than 5 days, usually within a few minutes after the end of the contest, but probably not 60 seconds. Some other questions here. A gentleman, Paul, whose call sign is Mike 0 Papa Golf X-Ray. He operates Mexico 9 X-Ray in the contests. And he says when he looks in the score database, which you showed us there in the slide, Even though I've got the filter set to reflect the category he was in and the checkbox to not show late entries, sometimes he gets different results than what his certificate says, and he's wondering how that happens.
I'd have to look at the specific situation. Yeah, Paul, what I would, rather me try to figure it out here in real time, why don't you shoot me an email to the questions email address, and I'll take some time to look at it in more detail and get right back to you. Let's do it that way.
That sounds good. Thanks, Paul, for your question. Andy,
please, Paul, please do that. I will get back to you. I promise.
Very good. Andy, Kilo 2 Alpha Delta Alpha, asks, please discuss the differences between assisted and unassisted in number of entries.
In number of entries, let's see. When we have that data, I think. Let me go back here. Are you seeing all this scrolling going on here?
Yeah.
Okay, hang in there, guys.
It gives it that real-time feel.
All right. So there's the data right in front of you. Let's see. So if you look at, again, this is a single up all band, high power assisted. Well, let's put it this way. In that band of operators, the high power guys are actually more assisted guys than unassisted. This is in the 2018 sideband contest. In the lower power guys, there's actually more unassisted than assisted, so it flips. If you look at them together, it's about 2,800 to 2,100. So it, oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. It's 2,900 to about 2,000. So it's still very much skewed towards unassisted in terms of all band entries. And I guess that's probably the answer for now anyway. I would say the trend is definitely moving towards more and more people entering assisted. I think that, and this is just my opinion, but I think when conditions come back, and by the way, guys, they are going to come back. I've been told by many people this is the case. But I think that when conditions come back, one of the reasons why a lot of people go use assistants is simply because they don't have a big enough station in poor conditions to run guys fast. So it's another way of putting more QSOs in the log faster. And I get that. I'm in that category in that kind of way when I operate at home with my wires. But when conditions get good and almost anybody can run, and there's 3 bands, so let's say during the day to do that, I think you're going to find more people are just going to do that and not necessarily hook up their horse to the assistance wagon as they do today. And that's not to criticize anybody that does that, because the assistance category, as you can see, has a lot of, it's a very popular category. You got thousands of people entering it. And there's a reason why we have it and keep it.
Very good. Well, thanks, John. Yeah, the questions are starting to roll in now, kind of fast and furious. Mario, whose call sign is Delta 7 Charlie Whiskey, asks, how many busted calls are allowed in a log of 1,000 QSOs?
There's not a magic number. Generally speaking, there are score restrictions that, and for some reason one of my slides didn't display that actually talked about the penalties associated with these things. I'm not sure what happened there, but nevertheless, there's no number. There used to be numbers in the past, for example, with duplicates back when that was a relevant term before computers, where any log that had more than 2 or 3%, depending on the contest, was actually subject for disqualification, if you can imagine that, in the days before computers. And the idea then, of course, was that, well, obviously, if people leave lots and lots of dupes in the log, they're trying to get something past us. And this, you know, in the days of paper logs, maybe there was a little bit of that. But nowadays, you know, we have enough penalties in place where you lose 2 QSOs for a busted call for every one you make, on top of the one you make that you lose. You know, penalties can be pretty painful if you have a lot of errors in your log. And again, the idea here is not to create a penal system where we're sending people to jail and making them feel bad about operating the contest and never coming back and doing it again. But rather, it's one, to create a level of fairness that accuracy is an important thing. And secondly, that you're aware of where you need to improve, and that's where you're going to focus. So if you see examples, you know, of a fairly high percentage of error rate, you know, then that's something you're going to say, you know what, maybe I need to slow down a little bit, or maybe I need to do a better job. For example, if you're running guys, and this is an operating practice that I would encourage everybody to embrace, and most people do, and that is the idea that somebody calls you, you only get part of the call. Alpha radio, you're 5905, and then he comes back and gives the call and his report, and you don't validate his call before moving on to the next one. Well, the reality is, if you don't validate it, there's a possibility that you got it wrong still. And by simply saying the call and verifying it, that's a way of ensuring that the QSO is good and you're not going to lose it. It seems like a simple thing, but it's amazing how many people, you know, in the spirit of operating fast or whatever the circumstances are, that don't take the very infinitesimal amount of time to get it right. And then that's the kind of stuff that we're just trying to have everybody just get better at. And that's really the point of penalizing. And it's not so much that you're only allowed a certain number. The number that we all ought to strive for is 0, right? And there's a few mutants out there that actually do that. I'm not one of them.
Got it. On the subject of busted calls, and I'll give you a stab at this one. I'm not sure where it goes, but W6YA, you know, he says, we ask that all contacts get logged. He says he's had busted QSOs from stations where friends pop in and give an exchange, but they don't log it, despite sending in a log.
Well, you know what? That's going to happen, and you know, unfortunately, all we have to operate from are logs of record, and I have, you know, I've encountered situations where people have said, you know, I even have the QSL card that shows I made the QSO and all these things, and the reality is that we have to have a system, a judging system that uses a fundamental building block to base all of our decisions on, and that fundamental building block is indeed the log of record. Nothing else matters.
You know,
so go.
I think I kind of misunderstood Jim's question. I think what he's really saying is, will you announce that all contacts should be logged? In other words, what he's saying is this has happened, and we all get that sometimes, but you know, if everybody would actually log every QSO they make when they send in their log, then the kind of problems that result from it wouldn't happen. I imagine like what Jim's talking about is probably a friend of his is doing a single band 20-meter effort, but he works Jim on 80 to give him a QSO, but he doesn't log it because it's an 80-meter QSO and he's doing a 20-meter single band effort.
Which, by the way, just in case there's any confusion on that point, you can do that.
It's perfectly legal.
Guys, you can work guys on other bands and log, and please log them, actually, not
That's what
just should I log them.
I think that's what Jim is saying. And
Yeah.
I know there's some confusion when you enter single band. Do you only send in your QSOs made on that band because that's what you entered? And people get that wrong sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're operating a mono 20, let's say, and 20 goes out, you got nothing to do, and you want to work guys because you know, you want to work guys, right? So you go to 40 or an 80 and whatever. You know, please work guys and please log those guys and please submit that log. And if you claim a single band 20-meter entry that has log QSOs and the log from other bands, we'll just ignore those from a scoring point of view, but we'll absolutely use them from a checking point of view. And that's really important, you know, to Jim's point, that's really important, you know, when you're, particularly if you're at a rarer place where, you know, somebody could lose a multiplier or something because you didn't choose to log those contacts.
Yeah, Roger. Here is a brilliant question from Carrie. Carrie Sierra Mike Zero Hotel Radio Papa asks, is SO2R on the same band not allowed? What about SO3R when sending on all three bands? Or sorry, when sending on three bands, all of course not at the same time.
SO3R.
Well, I think the question is it okay as long as you only have one signal on the air on any given band at any given time?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that we're after with this thing is the idea of not having multiple signals on the same band, whether you're single up or a multi up for that matter. So it's not so much SOXR as it is the fact that we really do require one signal at a time.
Okay. Forgive me, I'm writing a response to a question here. Mario, who asked earlier, he would like to know, what would John prefer for a 40-meter high power category, assisted or unassisted?
Well, I guess it depends on where I am. If I was operating at my home station with wires in the trees, I would be assisted. If I was operating, if there was such a possibility at, let's say, K3LR mono 40, then I would undoubtedly be unassisted. So, you know, the choice between assisted and unassisted really comes. What's that?
He just added another line. He said, specifically in Germany.
Oh, well,
sorry about that.
Again, in Germany too. If I'm operating with you know, wire antennas, or if I'm operating at TF0HQ, you know, I think, you know, the choice of assisted or unassisted really comes down to what floats your boat, and where do you have more radio fun? I mean, some people, without getting too philosophical here, but some people really enjoy the purity of the unassisted environment, that they can say and on Sunday night that they did it all themselves, right? That no one helped them find anything, that their score is what they did with their own two hands and their own two ears, right? Others, and I'm not saying one is good or bad, or any individual is good or bad by choosing one. Other people just like the fact they just like stuffing QSOs in their log, particularly at a smaller station, and they feel that assisted they can do more stuffing.
Huh.
So I'm not sure it matters so much whether you're in Germany or United States or anywhere else. It's really a question of what station capabilities do you have. Some people do it because they see a competitive opportunity to win a category in one over the other based on where they're at, looking at previous year's results and say, you know what, I think I can win the Mono 40 unassisted category from Germany. So that's what I'm going to do based on what people have done in the past and where I'm going to be operating from. And that becomes the criteria for how you make your decision. So there's no simple answer here. It's all the above that I said and probably more. Very
good. Yeah, it's an amazing contest, and there are so many possibilities. Mario says, great answer. Indeed. There is a whomper of a question from OH1RX. I'm going to save it for last and to get a couple of more award questions that should be pretty quick.
Duke, remember, I'm a friend of yours. Don't forget that.
Oh, that's right. That's right. No, it's a good question, and I would ask it too if I was in a long-term vision kind of frame of mind. But John W0JW wonders, what type or style of paper do you use to print your certificate to give it that award type feel? And I got to say, I wonder the same thing about downloaded certificates from the internet. It's all about how you print it, how it winds up looking.
Yeah. I can't tell you that I'm an expert in Staples paper inventory styles, but if I were printing a certificate that I want to put on the wall in a frame, I would probably I'd probably go to an office supply store and buy the best stuff you can buy. I mean, why not? Beyond that, I can't tell you specifically what to do. Just gooder is better than badder.
I think a printer would tell you, look for the highest cotton content you can find. Then the last award question is, if I operate at a multi-op and we win a plaque, is it possible for me to get one for my own wall?
Absolutely. I do that all the time. Sometimes the station owner will actually take care of that for their operators. I'm not suggesting if you don't that you're a bad station owner, but certainly if you're at a multi-op anywhere in the world, any entrance, and the entrance or the log submitted won a plaque, then you can get one for each of the operators. Send me your request to the questions email address, and I'll give you the details. But that's an easy one. Do it all the time.
Very good. So Ocean Hotel 1 Radio X-Ray asks a great question. When will we be ready for cloud logging, real-time online log entries to the worldwide CQ server, no log washing, and no post-contest corrections?
Yeah, I probably should never admit this, but it actually is my dream too, to put us out of business, right?
Yeah.
And there's actually a fellow around here. I won't get into details because he doesn't want to go public with any of this yet, but who's giving some thought to this very topic. And he is very interested in this idea of real-time cloud implementation of logging. I think that's going to come. I mean, from a technology point of view, it's absolutely doable today. Considering we still have about 50 guys that are still sending paper logs, we're not fully there yet. But I can see every time we've tried to lay a new layer of technology on the contest community in the spirit of making the worldwide a better contest, I can't think of a single example where it hasn't been fully embraced and adopted quickly. That's the nature of contesters, to be more on the leading edge than the trailing edge. And this is certainly a leading edge thing. I can't give you a time frame. There is a matter of technical resource to pull that together, and funding to some degree, at least to get it to the point of usability. There's a whole different philosophy on what logging programs do and how they work. There's all kinds of things that'll get in the way before we can declare victory in this area. But I can say this much, that I have no doubt that this is going to happen, and probably sooner than we think. So hats off to H1RX for raising it, and you know, it's going to take a mover and a shaker somewhere in the contest community who really cares about this and has access and ways to get resources to make it happen. I can tell you, speaking on behalf of the CQ Worldwide, that we would embrace such a thing over time, you know, provided that it really is a workable and viable solution. Everything that we do, I mean, if you look at even the history of scoreboards, for example, you know, that scoreboards have had a little bit of a rocky road in their very early days, as all these things have, right? But as we got more experience, as more people started using them, banging away on them, and fixing things, using scoreboarding as an example, it really has proven to be a really cool and useful technology that motivates lots and lots of people, hundreds of people, and growing by the day. So I really can envision the same thing happening with this as well.
Excellent. Paul, who is Mike Zero Papa Golf X-Ray, has commented here that if you Google the term cloud log, you can see that a fellow in Scotland is developing it, although it's not contest software, and I suppose we could say yet, huh? One last comment. If John W0JW, if you're still listening, got a recommendation from another commenter saying if you take the PDF to the printer and have them do it, you'll get the kind of results you're looking for. And that's a really good tip. That's thanks to Randy K5ZD. Randy has another question, John. We'll close it out. He says, what is this 1 minute rule? I thought we had 5 days.
Well, first of all, it's not 1 minute for, I assume he's referring to committee members. It's 24 hours, not 1 minute.
Oh.
I believe I said that earlier on, but nevertheless.
Oh, you did. I think I referenced the 1 minute rule when I was talking about my Alt-N log scrubbing that I'm not supposed to do. Oh, no, wait, that I'm allowed to do, right?
Yeah. The reference to 1 minute was the fact that if you think about it, as I said before, when you operate on or off for the whole 48 hours, if you think about the contest as one that actually goes for 48 hours and 1 minute, that extra minute of commitment you make in the weekends of the contest could be fulfilled by simply uploading your log, because that's all it's going to take. That's what the minute reference is about.
Very, very good, John. Well, thank you so much. We have completely emptied the question queue, and I am grateful for a fantastic presentation and a very thoughtful question and answer period afterwards. For anybody who's interested, when we're done here, I get a video of this, and I'll turn it into a YouTube post it on YouTube, reference it from the WWROF website, and probably make a post to the CQ contest reflector saying it's available at that time. With no other questions, I'm going to wrap it up. Will that work for you, John?
That works for me. I would encourage all of you, if you have interesting stories to tell after the contest that would be of interest to our broader audience, and or pictures of your operation where you too could be famous in CQ magazine with a picture of your operation, send that stuff to me in the coming months, and we'll consider that for the contest write-ups. I would just close by saying that I'm truly, and this is not just smoke here, I am truly humbled to be in this job. You know, I remember years and years and years ago, probably about 1975, I remember walking into K3EST's living room at K3ZO's house, and I saw a stack of CQ Worldwide logs, And I asked Bob, "What's that?" And then here we are 45 years later. I now know what they are.
Oh, and
so
how?
Thank you to everyone for the opportunity, and I hope to serve you well as long as I do this.
Very good. Thanks, John. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar was provided at no charge as a service to the contesting community by the Worldwide Radio Operator Foundation, which is dedicated to improving the skills of amateur radio operators around the world, utilizing education, competition, advancement of technology and scientific research, promoting international friendship and goodwill, and preparing them to better, I can't even read my own writing. That'll have to do. To better serve society in times of communication need. And there we are. Thanks again, everybody. This will get posted on the internet as soon as we can get to it. Take care. So long.
So long, guys.